all to the 2018 New York Alternative Investment Roundtable monthly call. I am Robert Atkinson, COO of Miri Asset Securities USA. We are delighted today to welcome Russ Summers, Senior Manager of Baker Tilly. Russ has over 12 years of experience in the field of public accounting, risk advisory, information technology, and cybersecurity, specifically as it relates to financial services and other highly regulated industries. Russ has led a broad array of projects, including cybersecurity consulting, regulatory compliance consulting, internal controls advisory, internal audit, information technology audit and risk assessment, vendor risk management, enterprise risk management, and SOC SOC reporting at Tilly. So again, we are pleased to have Russ join us. This is obviously a hot topic, cybersecurity, what the buyer needs to know. Before we begin and before I turn it over to Russ, I do want to acknowledge and thank our loyal sponsors. You can see up on the screen, we have Alston Bird, BNY Mellon, Grant Thornton, Baker Tilly, Newton Capital, Virtual Systems, Bennett, and Kaya. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Russ. Russ, do you have any opening comments that you'd like to make before we dive into the questions?
Well, it's just you looking at the bio you just kind of went through for me. It sounds like a lot of stuff.
You've been a busy guy.
But I mean, I guess I would boil it down, right, and say, look, a lot of that, and quite frankly, a lot of cybersecurity really boils down to just a few core concepts that I think everyone can be familiar with, right? So I think if I can get everyone here today that has questions about cybersecurity to leave, understanding that, right, managing cybersecurity is like managing any other risk, right? You've got to have, process to identify the specific risk to which you're exposed, have a process to apply internal controls, and then employ kind of talented, skilled resources, right? I think a lot of the things that we just talked about as we went through, right, from all the different types of products, all kind of speak to those same things, right? So have an adequate process, understanding internal controls, understanding, risk assessment, and then it's just a matter of deployment. So I think when we think through that, right, of all those things, even though some of them sound a little bit different, the themes are the exact same, right? It's about processes and controls and then that governance structure. So again, I think everything we talk about is going to kind of have those flavors to it. So again, if anyone here is really kind of concerned, about understanding cybersecurity, I think we can really help kind of down through those concepts. So. Yes,
thank you, Russ. And I'd also like to say that if folks have questions that they're either unable to think of right now or in the near term, we do have your contact information up, and I would encourage everyone to reach out to Russ. So on that note, why don't I lead off with some questions here? I think without doubt, cybersecurity has emerged as an area of great concern, an area of significant risk in recent years. It hasn't come off or moved down the list, and we're still hearing a lot about breaches. What are you hearing still about breaches? What's that all about?
So, again, I think, everyone's familiar with some of the breaches that we've heard about, right? Everything from P. Morgan back in 2014 through Target and Home Depot and, the healthcare breaches, and then most recently Equifax, right? And you kind of about that and you go, I guess, how are these big companies being affected? Kind of what's the source for a lot of these? And again, why do they continue to happen? So I think the first thing is, quite frankly, look, the bad guys are really good at sharing information. There's a network out there that actors use to share different vulnerabilities, different tactics, different types of schemes and scams, pass those along, right? I think the other to that is, the good guys have to be right every time, whereas the bad guys only have to be right once, So, and if you've got a great information security program, you've got all the bells and whistles, you've got invest a lot of money in your cybersecurity infrastructure and all your different monitoring tools, and let's say they catch 9,999 items out of 10,000, that they through can still have a significant impact. So we're not talking about things where acceptable loss is really a concept. So one bad act can get through and really have a big impact. I'll give you just some quick tidbits of information, right? And again, this really kind of helps to simplify the impact of cybersecurity and really kind of help lessen it, right? So when we think about some of the main breaches that I just talked through, right? Target, I'm pretty sure everyone knows, that happened through an HVAC vendor that had access to our network. They didn't adequately segregate network from vendors to their internal network. Again, that was a phishing scheme where employee credentials were accessed and compromised. The backer sat on those to find most privileged access, and then several months, I think it was over a year after they really exploited and compromised those assets, had data from the system. And again, facts really centered around patching of a web application tool. It was just simply they had an unpatched vulnerability that they, I believe, had known about, and they hadn't patched it in time, and it was exploited. So the three, right? One is adequate network segmentation. It's really just separating your guest network from your production network, from your regular environment. One is not responding to phishing campaigns and entering your credentials and making sure you understand the email that you receive before your credentials in there. The one is, again, having an adequate patching program and making sure that your applications are up to date and appropriately patched. So I guess I'll start by just saying that none of those three things are crazy or wild or new or overly sophisticated, but yet they're still out there. So I think the key, right, is to make sure that you process for a set of types of information that's out there, making sure you stay abreast of actually is out there and going on in the marketplace and how that impacts you.
If I can, let me ask you a question about, you gave some very interesting industry-wide examples. Most of the folks on the call are, let's say, involved in either Buyside activities or in support of Buyside activities. And this would be a little unfair to ask of you, but are there any types of relationships that the Buyside might have that present special problems, special challenges for them when it comes to cybersecurity? Third-party, fourth-party risk, whatever it is. What people look for?
Again, I would say when at thirties in general, looking at the Buyside, there's a lot of involved third parties, right? And I'm thinking through one specific example in the services industry where there was a pool that was working with a third party, and they had the party was conducting transactions on their behalf, and the pool was supposed to be monitoring those transactions. Second was there were fraudulent emails from a spoof email address, which and the bad actor their original sending address and made it look like it was coming from the pool, instructing to be sent on their behalf, and they were sent out by the third party, right, who again operated in good faith and believed they had the right information. And long story short, there were several wires. They lost a few $1 million, and the regulators came in and wound up assessing, saying, hey, they didn't have adequate supervision over their third parties to begin with. So that's just a direct example of what can happen. Now, specific to what should happen over third parties, and I think again we can talk through some of this as we get to go down the road. But the big piece of interacting with any third parties is going to be do assessment up front of your business and understanding answering very simple questions, right? It's not an easy exercise, but ask yourself, what do I receive, from customers? What do I do with it? Who do I do? What do I do with it? And where do either I store it or where do they store it, and kind of how that goes. And then financially, right, about what authority am I delegating out of internal controls and approvals to have on transactions with third party, and how do I validate it? And again, something as simple as, with the wire transfer example I just talked about, a callback mechanism where, hey, if you receive, these requests, that there's sort of confirmation that comes back directly to me, and it's outside of that email chain. Because just to give an example, email like that and sending wire transfer instructions, that's not a sophisticated attack. That's somebody who's, that could be a 16-year-old kid living in his mother's basement can put that together in 15 or 20 minutes. So long as they have the right personnel name, they have the right naming convention for an email address, and they have the appropriate person to send to. That's fairly easy to craft up. That's not a very sophisticated thing. So having a control in place to kind of back through and confirm on that would mitigate that risk, that specific risk. Is that? I'm sorry, I answered the question you asked.
Please.
No, I was just asking, did that address the question?
Yeah, yes, it does. And I just want to ask another follow-up. With respect to spoofing and phishing, do you think it's fair to say at this point that one should be suspect of any email that they don't or any email from an address they don't recognize at this point?
Right, we'll know what normal is, right? And I think the thing about cybersecurity is not getting lulled into a false sense of security, right? And throughout the course of a given week, right, regardless of whether you get hundreds of emails a day or thousands of emails a day, right, you know which ones are useful, which ones aren't. You know who should be sending you something, you know who shouldn't. And you should know what to expect, right? And I guess the other piece outside of kind of that expectations, right? So again, you have that feel for what you should come to get. That looks to get significant tranches of data, anything that looks to change payment terms, to update wiring instructions, anything that has a financial impact like that, I would say, there should be some sort of additional confirmation that's necessary. And I'll give you an example of another, and this is really industry agnostic type of scam that's out there. And what you'll get is, get a bad actor who is there surfing and trying to find out what specifically they can do for profit, right? Because look, I think most of these cybersecurity events are financially motivated, right? I think the last statistic that I had heard about the financial motivation was, I think 5% or so of security activity had some sort of financial motivation specifically. So let's use the example of a third party, right? So it isn't to vilify third parties, right? Everyone has a job to do. Let's say that third party likes to brag about their customers and say, hey, we do work with all these great companies. You should work with us too, because some of these people are your friends, some of these people are competitors. We've got this competency, and we're going to brag about who we do business with, right? So, right? In terms of they've been the marketplace, and in this case, a bad actor, access to their client list, right? So they're telling them this is who we do business with. So, a little bit of additional legwork, right? That actor can most likely look at that vendor's website, can look at who the relationship managers are, because usually they'll give you that contact information for the relationship manager for this region. So okay, the New York region, or for this specific product line, this is their product manager. And then a bad actor can take that information from the vendor website. So now they have the name of the relationship manager, they have the relationship manager's contact information, and know that now your company does business with them because they've put your logo up there and told everyone that they do business with you. So the ease of a bad actor now taking that information, email as if they were that relationship manager and telling you, hey, we've changed our payment terms. We're still at the same financial institution, but now this is our new routing information and account number for payments. And again, no other change. There's no direct action, but then the next time you go to pay them, that wire goes to wherever they adjusted it to as opposed to where they intended it. And that information was all made available through third-party relationship because they bragged about their relationship with your company. So I think the more enacted that we are, the more hyper-connected the businesses want to stay, the more we communicate, via email, and more information that we back and forth to one another, I think the more at risk we are. So I would caution everyone that's on here that anytime you're getting an email sort of communication that gives you insurance for sending money or doing specific transactions, simple callback, and don't call back the number that is on email that you got. Go back with your original contact and who you have the relationship with that that's a known commodity, and go back and circle back with them and say, hey, did you send this to me? And is this what it is? And they'll go, well, no, I didn't. I have no idea what that is. And then you say there's different ways to address it from there, whether it's directly with law enforcement or whatever. But yeah, I would say there's a lot of specific examples in that realm.
And it's a good point, Russ. So in response to these breaches, the regulatory community has certainly implemented new rules and regulations and laws. Can you talk about some of these regulatory initiatives? Specifically, what are some of the commonalities among these regulations that might be impacting our audience today?
So we're in the last few years, and I'm sure everyone on the call in can relate. We're in an ever-evolving regulatory environment where it seems as though every regulator who can possibly take claim domain, right, is doing so. And again, the new quote-unquote sexy regulation that's coming out now is cybersecurity, right, and protecting both individual data and acting in the best interest of the consumer, and those sorts of things. So some of the leaders, I guess, in this space, I would say, specific financial services, are the New York Department of Financial Services as it relates to anyone operating under New York banking, insurance, or financial services law. There's the National Association of Insurance Commissioners came in on the back end for insurance companies. The FFIEC, the banking regulators, have put out cybersecurity guidance in their cybersecurity assessment tool. FINRA and the SEC have come together talking about exam priorities through the OCIE, have put out some very specific guidance there. FINRA has also put out what they called their small firm checklist for cybersecurity to kind of give some of the smaller groups an opportunity to, hey, scale this to a certain degree, be able to take credit for some of the work you can do, and here's some cool things that they can have. Again, the CFTC put out their rules on system safeguard and testing requirements. The FTC has, their quote-unquote with security standard. So again, the more you look, there's quite a bit of regulation out there. I would warn everyone, though, is depending on, again, which regulator you kind of report to, or which group of regulators as domain, depending on who you interact with, as well as your kind of primary regulator. With any of these regulations, it is a bit of a catch-22, right? So forcing organs to implement cybersecurity programs, really forcing to do anything for, or rule, forces folks to look at it and say, okay, well, I have a rule now. I'm just going to work to comply with that rule, as opposed to, hey, I'm going to work to do the right thing. I'm going to go put forward a comprehensive cyber program to protect my customer or, to isolate my company. Now I've got this rule set that I can comply with and say, hey, I've at least complied with that rule. I think to a certain extent, unless they're ultra prescriptive and not scalable amongst organizational size, it is force in a little bit of complacency. What say are some of the commonalities amongst all of them, right? First and foremost is the risk assessment, right? So similar to what we talked about before with third parties, and making sure that you've kind of got understanding of what information you get, what you do with it, who you give it to, where it goes, kind of on the identification side, and then walking through specifically what the risks are to your business. And then, again, as we talked about internal controls at the very beginning, looking at what your process is for mitigating some of those key risks, right? So how do you protect that data, your specific security/information security program, and that'll outline, all your policies and procedures and your specific controls that are there. Some of the other key pieces that are prevalent in a lot of the different regulations and are just general best practices are security awareness training and making sure that people, kind of know what good looks like and are reminded of such on a regular basis. Access to systems, so as far as provisioning access out, provisioning access to third parties, controlling physical access to assets, house data, both, and any network devices and things like that. And some of the rest of it get into, a little bit more on the technical side as far as different to authenticate, remotely into systems, having possible either risk-based authentication or multi-factor authentication, similar when you've got your username and password, but then also, you get the text message to your phone that gives you a unique code, and you've got to have that other data piece to be able to go through authenticate as well, or tokenization on some of the financial institution sites, things like that, kind of satisfy the requirement, but making sure that's used more frequently, especially for some of the areas that are at risk in your organization.
Okay. For us. Now, a moment ago, we talked a little bit about spoofing and phishing. My question is, what other types of cyber attacks are you seeing in the marketplace? And what can people do to protect themselves against these threats?
I would still say phishing is probably the number one that's there. Probably because it's easy, right? It doesn't have to be sophisticated. There's a couple different ways to distribute, phishing messages. You can do, broad-based phishing, and it sends it out to, just a database full of people, and see who clicks on it and go. Again, phishing email could be, just give a couple quick examples. It could be something. Let's say it's an email masked as though it's from a known party, right? So whether it's a masked internal email, like from the HR department, or if it's masked from a key third party, and it says, here's this thing that you've asked for, right? Here's this file. You click on it, and it downloads malicious code onto your system, right? So whether it's malware that, again, is going through and looking for data, trying to exfiltrate that data, or it's ransomware that just locks down your network and has to hold you ransom for that specific information. Those both come through there, as the account takeovers, right? So, folks for you to log in with credentials, and then use those credentials to then go into the system and whether it's, conduct, malfeasant or fraudulent transactions, or again, use that to access non-public information and exfiltrate it from your network. That's actually how, in the Anthem breach, the first one, the relationship with their benefits administrator, WellPoint, and the email that went through had directed the users to, instead of WELL.point.com, it was WE11point.com, and they had to log in with their credentials, and actually how they access those credentials. So again, something so similar, so simple. All they had to do was look at the, homepage of what that was, literally copy the homepage and then just throw in a free text box for the login, and then direct back to the other page for WellPoint. So create some linkages between their fake page and then the next page. When credentials went in, it just put their credentials in, and they got logged in to the they had intended on logging into. They just didn't realize that there was a redirect that went through it, and that's how their credentials got compromised. So I stress enough the volume that comes through here, again, because for bankers that let's say that's their job or that's their part-time job or that's what they do in their non-work hours, if they do have a gainful employment, these games aren't sophisticated, and it's a volume-based game. So the more stuff they send, the likely somebody is to click on it, or click and open a file, or just their credentials. So again, I think that it is, people are more sophisticated about understanding it, but I think still just again a volume-based game to where the more stuff that gets sent, the more folks are to get breached.
So I would agree with you. I think that the examples you just gave do sound rather simple. But on the other hand, I think we're being told that cybersecurity tends to involve very complex issues. So can you help us to reconcile the difference between the two?
Yeah, I think, like we talked about at the beginning, right? Cybersecurity is complex because you've got to do it right every time, right? You can't be 90%, or you can't 80%, because that 10 or 20% failure rate is blow up, and it could be catastrophic, right? And you've got to do it right at every layer. So we talked a bit before about the cybersecurity program and kind of what those commonalities were amongst the regulation. But again, just thinking from a practical security perspective, to do security well, you've got to have your program, your policies and procedures, right? So you've got to have your documentation that governs. You've got to have end user education. People are going to continue to be the weakest point, and having a once a year training class where everyone that has access to your information has to sit through it and click on the button every 15 minutes to let you know they're still alive, and answer a 3-question give me test at the end of the year isn't going to provide value. You've got to train them really on what is actually going on out there, and reinforce the behavior. So there's a bunch of different ways to do that. There's a lot of good outside vendors that provide that, and it's fairly cost effective, giving some phishing simulation and then some sorting training and things like that. Next, you've got to have your network security. So again, whether it's internal or whether it's outsourced to somebody else, there should be web filtering. There should be, again, wireless network segmentation, segmenting, the production network versus any guest access that comes in, email filtering, firewalls, and all the actual kind of tools that are there, the antivirus, anti-malware pushed out to machines and on the network to make sure that any things identified as quarantined and addressed. But then also understanding that things can happen, right? So you have the greatest information security program, you could have the greatest tools, you could have the smartest people, and you know what? Whether it's just you didn't get to something in time, or it's a 0-day type attack. Hey, it's the first time it's been identified. It's someone just identified this vulnerability. No one even knew it existed. So if you had all the right tools in place and information sharing organization relationships, this thing just came out. It just happened. So now what do you do with it? And really getting down to that, having an incident response plan and something that's going to help you detect when it goes wrong, right? So whether it's detecting tranches of information leaving your network, whether it's establishing expected norms for activity on your network from a user by user basis, and then looking for spikes, after hours and those sorts of things. Whether it's log monitoring for intrusion prevention, intrusion detection when you're trying to gain unauthorized access to your network, whatever those things are, and having a process to deal with it, right? So once it's detected, a process in place to respond to it accordingly. So having that incident response plan and saying, okay, here's what we're going to do, if this, then that type decisioning, and recover back to normal operations. Either recover that information or get everything back up and running after the fact. So, and I would say that's probably going to be the hardest part for a lot of folks, is because, you process, and even if you have an incident response plan, going through a test of it and making sure that you actually understand tactically how it's going to work, I think is going to be very, very important there. But again, just to be clear, and I know I said this earlier, getting better. Their information way better than we do, right? Is once something's successful, they hear that through that network, and that grassroots information spreads like wildfire. Whereas, the good guys, even if you're in information sharing networks, and even if you're, following some of the industry leader security, threads like, Krebs on security and Threat Post and Before, and NJ Kick has one, NJCICC, I think it is, Open Threat Exchange, and all these other information security hubs for information. They can only deal with what they have. So, again, if you don't, people don't share with one another on the good guy side about, hey, I've seen this, or hey, we got attack with this, and then share it out. And I understand the reasons for not wanting to tell everyone else and give them the roadmap on how you got exposed. But again, that limits the effectiveness of everyone else to be able to protect themselves as well. Bad guys, quite frankly, are much better at that. And then the last thing I say there is, I said it before, and I'll say it again, bad actors, in hacking and malicious activity from a security perspective is a game. Even if we are getting better at protecting it, people realize that there is money to be made there. Whether it's through ransomware or selling records on the dark web, or direct motivation for some of these attacks. The more they send, even if the hit rate goes down at a higher volume, it's still going to be a profitable endeavor. So, I think there's probably more bad actors and more different ways to exploit things now than there ever has been. Again, I'll give you an example real quick, and kind of stop pontificating. But I think it was 2016, right? The first quarter of 2016 was, I want to say it was around 220 million in losses relating to ransomware in the first quarter of 2016 per the FBI. Annualize that out, it was projected to cost approximately $1 billion for ransomware in 2016. And I'm sure everyone on here heard about it. Some folks, I hope, weren't affected by it, but I'm sure someone on the phone had some experience with it directly. But when WannaCry came through, the cost to recover from WannaCry was $1 billion by itself. And again, it was a massive ransomware attack. The interesting thing about that number, Bob, is that even though it cost $1 billion globally to recover from, only $100,000 of $1 billion was actual ransom. So the rest of that money that was paid out of that $1 billion was just recovery costs. So again, to really stress down having a good, insurance plan, have a good DR, disaster recovery plan, and being able to recover timely and knowing how you're going to recover is more important now than it ever has been.
It sounds like a very serious criminal enterprise. One type of attack I don't think I've heard you mention, but is the brute force attack. I've heard of that. What exactly is that, and how prevalent is it?
Yeah, this is funny, right? Because when people think about hacking, they think of whether it's a movie they saw it in, or whether you're this group of people, and the black hat hackers, and they're sitting in there and they're actively trying to circumvent your security and circumvent your network, and they're going to go through and just put the hammer down, and they're going to attack your network, and they're going to just break through with some sophisticated hacking tool, right? They're sitting in front of a computer with 6 computer screens, and they're typing away feverishly, and they're going to do all this stuff, and it's this game of cat and mouse through your security network to try and hammer through, right? At least that's what I picture, right? And I do this for a living, right? I close my eyes and I think hacker, and that's what I want to envision, right? I want to envision some super smart, super technical person that's just going to, some computer wizardry out there and just cripple your network because they're just that much smarter and that much better. To be frank, it's not the case, right? So what happens again is we talked about before about some of the phishing attacks and things like that. There's simple ways to attack a network, right? And I equate it to this, right? Into a computer network that has adequate layered security, that's been set up appropriately, that has the right monitoring, that has the right controls, that has, again, a strong program. That's like trying to beat Roger Federer at tennis, right? You have this really good thing on the other side, and like you really better be really good at what you do and be on your best day. I would rather beat Roger Federer at a hot wing eating contest, right? I would much rather try and beat him something that he's probably not as good at. And again, it's really finding that Achilles heel and exploiting it. So rather than just beating through a door, right? And think in terms of like old medieval times, right? A brute force attack is like the breach team has a battering ram and they're going to hammer through the castle gate while there's archers up top and are defending it. When meanwhile you can just kind of go around and go through the back side of the castle and get yourself in, right? And what that is from a cybersecurity perspective is that's people, right? It's the people that got on the phishing email, that want their $5 Dunkin' Donuts gift card that someone's giving them for no reason. That the person who's entering their credentials into this website or entering their password because it says they're going to save their password so they don't have to enter it again and remember it. It's the people who click on the file that they didn't ask for, that someone's sending them, and they have no idea what it is, but they want to click on it to see what they're being sent. It's the person who picks up the flash drive in the office lobby that says employee salaries on it. Doesn't realize that there's a highly unlikely that file A would be there and B would be named as such. That's a weak spot right there, right? So again, I think even small companies have, very reasonable cybersecurity programs. They've got some basic filtering. They've got, possibly managed service provider to watch some of these things. And punchline is it's easier to trick people than to break through all sorts of robust technology.
Sounds like the biggest challenge an organization has really are its employees, making sure the employees ultimately are the first line of defense, right? We're the gatekeepers. So what firms be doing to mitigate this type of risk? The people.
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you, look at a lot of the cybersecurity discussions that I've been involved in, a lot of the successful and unsuccessful attacks that people have been faced with. I'd say the actors in the cyber, criminal community has definitely identified that people continue to be the weakest link. And it's part of it is because of fatigue, part of it is because of familiarity, part of it could just be laziness, part of it is, lack of education and understanding for sorts of the workforce. People definitely continue to be at risk. So, what I would tell you is there's cost-effective ways to test and evaluate people, right? Conducting sample phishing exercises, again, not the and things like that, although there is some value there up front to conduct a baseline just to really understand what people are going to for. But for the most part, the attacks that we're getting now aren't the old Nigerian prince email, hi, I'm the Prince of Nigeria, please do this for me, and here's some free money.
I miss the Nigerian prince.
Well, dang, right? So as funny as that sounds, as funny as that whole Nigerian prince thing, like if I got one, I would just laugh it off and keep moving on. But in Louisiana last year, they arrested this guy. He was like 65 years old, and he was the middleman for a Nigerian prince email scam. And I'm not kidding. And
it's not funny. I know it's not funny, but
no, it is, but it isn't, right? It's laughable, but not funny. But they said I guess he alone was responsible for extorting, or acquiring through illicit means several $100,000, and that those Nigerian prince-style email scams still were successful in acquiring over a couple $1 million a year. And that's the kind of thing that makes you sit back and go, good Lord, like we're doomed. But I guess everyone, look, that's not just in the business world, that's across America, and I guess not every decision is a good decision for some folks, but I would say is, like, conduct phishing exercises and showing people that, hey, this is what you could get, this is out there, conducting a baseline, and then do phishing tests, show the results, doing phishing tests, show people the results again, because there's a lot of stuff that's out there. I know we talked through the third parties already. There's a lot of other information out there that people just willingly give away. I always I laugh, when folks talk about some of the technology they have nowadays, right, with the Alexas and the Google Homes, right, because ago people were afraid that their houses were wiretapped, and now they wiretap themselves. And I give some just one specific example about oversharing and the risk that has back to your organization. So, let's just say this is ABC company. They have a CEO who's got a big, social media profile, loves to tell people where he's going, what he's doing, to talk about his company, and has a big social media profile. So it tells people what hotel he's checking into, tells them what conference he's going to, checks into his restaurant at nighttime, takes pictures at his restaurant, tags all the people that he's out to dinner with, and tells all those folks. So think this, right? If you're a actor and you think, you're going to try and exploit some money out of this organization, if you now have the CEO's name, have his travel itinerary, when he flew out, where he flew into, when he's going home, who he had dinner with, what hotel he's staying at, mostly what he had for dinner, and things like that. Would easy, a person sleeping at night to send a message back to the company and say, my credit card got compromised. I was at the dinner with such and such last night at this place. I'm here for this amount of time. I need you to wire me this much money, just to cover me for expenses, because I'm not going to be able to get a credit card until I get back, because the credit card company won't ship my new credit card to a hotel. But tell me if you think that's an easy scheme for someone if they're just paying attention on Facebook and social media to pick up on.
No, I would agree with you. I think it's otherwise known as too much information, right? TMI. Let me ask you something else. What about Google searches on individuals? How does that play into this?
Again, I think you got a ton of information, folks, just what's out there, right? So we call some open source intelligence work and done specific spear phishing on individuals inside of an organization, right? And this was directed by information security and specifically directed towards executives, because those are the ones that are most at risk. But if you're searching around, you can find out things about folks that, are just unbelievably useful if you were trying to exploit them and catch them with their guard down, right? So just a couple of quick examples. Boards at, alma maters and alumni associations and things like that, you can just look up specifically if that, let's say you have somebody who's, very involved in their alma mater, you start, corresponding back and forth as if you're someone that went to that school. You've all of a sudden now got this rapport, you catch somebody with their guards down, you start sending over some payloads, say that way. Let's say you're a big fan, right? You're a member of, 3 different Porsche clubs, and you're president of, Porsche Owners of America, or whatever, group that is, and, big or whatever. And again, that's something that folks can use from open source intelligence, and then send you messages specifically around, hey, this new Porsche that's coming out, take a look at these pictures, and then you go to open it, and boom, it's malware. Thinking through things like that as far as here's exposure on the internet, and if someone were to Google me, here's stuff that I'm already throwing out there about myself, and then how can that be used back to you, right? So The two that I go to specifically a lot are alma maters and specific, very specific interests. Right? So like the Porsche example, or somebody's a big, arch hunter or whatever that thing is. Big with our golf club and such and such. So there's a lot of things that people, love to tell other folks about how cool we are, about how fun we are or whatever. And that's the same type of information that can be used against you in a cyber attack.
Okay. Let's get back to, we were talking about employees before and how important it is to prepare and educate them. What else so what else can the company be doing as educating employees?
Yeah,
and just to call your attention, we've got limited time, and we've got about 13 minutes left.
Sure. I definitely actually would like to open it up for questions, so I'll keep this fairly brief, and then we can have that discussion. Look, in addition to, educating employees, I think the big thing that companies can do is conduct assessment, and really, again, it all starts with getting an understanding of what do I get, what information am I getting, what do I do with it, who do I give it to, how do I get it back, and being able to answer those questions around specifically that non-public information that you're dealing with. The other side of that is looking at assets at risk and saying, okay, how susceptible am I financially? How susceptible am I to, ransomware, and just, susceptible am I to denial of service and things like that, where, your information systems can be used against you, and what would you be willing to and I think that's the crux around, ransomware, right, is what are you willing to give to get it back, right? So having that understanding of what you actually have that's at risk, right, recovery procedures are, right, so going to that risk assessment as far as here's what is from non-public information, here's what it is from operating our system, right, and what we need to operate, and then asking yourself, just like, right, in very basic terms, what could go wrong? What could actually happen based on us to our non-public information, to our assets, and specifically the operation of our system from a security perspective, and then answering the question, based on what could go wrong, I'm going to address that. What process do I have in place? What internal control do I have in place? What outsourced third party do I have in place? And giving specific examples, right? So let's talk for 1 second about ransomware. So to give that example, you've got this risk that you get hit with ransomware and you become unable to operate. So what are we dealing with here, right? So is it maybe maybe you've been targeted before, right? The impact. If you can't operate, you can't do business for for several days. The impact on your business could be catastrophic. So okay, we got to do something. So what do you do? Right? And the answer to ransomware, right, is not have a Bitcoin account ready and start funding everyone's ransom demands, because usually once you've been attacked with ransomware, that however they got in, right, that information has been shared, and usually fairly susceptible to be attacked again. So what I would say is, have that great recovery plan in place. The control on the back end would be have, a good incident response plan, have a strong disaster recovery plan, and specifically have secure encrypted backups, right? Because the way that ransomware works, it gets on your network, it gets on a machine that's infected, it spreads throughout your network, finds your backups, and deletes them, and then locks down, all your data. So you can recover with anything that's on the network. So having a backup that's encrypted, having a backup that's off your network and accessible to be brought back on, that's current, so you don't lose a lot of information, right? And that's going to help you significantly recover from that. So I think going through that exercise for all of your what could go wrongs is really going to help your ability to respond.
Okay, that's excellent. Thank you so much. And in the remaining time, I'd like to open for any questions from the audience. Just want to call everyone's attention that at the bottom of the page, there's an area to chat, to send us questions. So please feel free in the remaining 10 that we have to send questions to us. Russ, I have a question for you. It just came in. You talked earlier about third parties and the outsourcing of key functions. So the question is, what can financial services companies do to protect themselves and their data with third party and outsourcing of key functions?
That's I talked before about understanding the flow of data, like what you get, what you do with it, how you outsource it, and all. So I think obviously that's first. Just understanding in your environment, here we do, here's what we take in, here's what we deal with. And then specific to third parties, I think first and foremost is establishing that list of third parties who you deal with. It's as simple as if you pull the AP register, right? Who do you pay? Start with that list, right? So who do you pay directly, right? Who do you just transfer money to? Who do you pay for items? Who provides a service that's not, processing things on behalf? And who does, right? So what third parties in there actually, whether it's a transaction, or conduct transactions on your behalf, and start with that list. From a point, you just take a look at it and say, okay, criticality to operations, how critical are they? Are they mission critical? Could you operate without them? Are adequate alternatives and backups, things like that, and kind of go through that vendor assessment and say, okay, I know who we're dealing with. I know how critical they are to us. I know what types of information they deal with from a non-public information perspective. Right? So at that point, I would say drive to getting some sort of assurance, right? So the premier assurance, I guess, over third parties is a SOC report, right? So SOC 1 or SOC 2, depending on whether it's financial transactions or confidentiality over information. I can really getting yourself familiar with what those things mean. So the SOC 1 is over internal controls over financial reporting, so talking about material financial transactions on your behalf, whereas the SOC 2, look at trust services principles, looks into the confidentiality of non-public information and what they're doing with it, and really breaks down to a couple key areas. Okay. Those are, security, availability, process integrity, and then for non-public information, most important two are privacy and confidentiality. So that's really that vendor's opportunity to tell you, hey, here's you, right? So they're going to describe their system, these industry standards, and these industry standard principles and the criteria underneath it. And by the way, we've had someone come in and evaluate it. This they said, and here's their opinion on whether we meet those criteria or not. So being able to receive those as the end user of that third party and say, hey, I've got some comfort over what that person's doing. They've told what they do. They told me the criteria that they meet and how they meet those. And then there's a third party that's actually going to perform attestation over it. So I think that gives you some pretty good comfort. Out of that, there's some assessments, questionnaires. There's obviously spending time on site and actually observing how they do things or whatever. But anytime there's a third party, CPA firm giving an attestation over, separation, I would put a lot of credence in that.
Okay. Excellent. Questions from the audience, please. So I do want to thank Russ Summers of Baker Tilly for a very comprehensive and in-depth discussion on cybersecurity. I think that we learned a lot here today, Russ. And again, I want to thank you. If all we have, I want to wish everyone a terrific month and thank Russ again and look forward to speaking with you next month during the April call. So folks, thanks again, and Russ, thank you.
All right.